Yes, I'm Allison Davis, a longtime resident of Teaneck, New Jersey, and a very proud member of the Bergen County, New Jersey chapter of the Links Incorporated. I also want to make mention of the fact that what Randall's not telling you is that just 2 years ago he was admitted into the Hall of Fame, one of the most prestigious places in our organization, and for many, many years in the
Hello everyone, I'm Sandra Dawson Long-Weaver, and I'm one of the founders, and Allison and I talk about, we signed the sheet. I'm number 8, she's number 9, I sit on the floor next to her. And my career mostly in Philadelphia. I started off in Wilmington, Delaware, there, and then moved to Philadelphia and spent most of my career at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I was the first African-American female managing editor, and then eventually became vice president for news for both the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Philadelphia Daily News, as we began to merge those two newspapers into one. I'm lucky I have my son is here with me, so he's hiding back there. And I also have a daughter, and I have 3 grandchildren.
Jay? Good evening, my name is Jay Dow. I'm a correspondent and host for WPIX TV, host of Community Close-Up, and I am a nephew and a child of the founders of NABJ, and when I say that, I mean we all stand on your shoulders. And I would not be where I am today. I would have not done half of the things that I've done, had access and opportunities without standing on the shoulders of giants. And so it is my pleasure and honor to be here with you this evening.
And we should also add that Jay's uncle, God rest his soul, Harold Dow, one of my mentors, dear friends, and big brothers. I want to begin our questions with Allison, who, shall we say, was the visionary person behind the idea for the film. Tell us about that origin story.
Very quickly, as you saw, the person whose name I don't mention, who ran for the Republican nomination and who unfortunately won. Am I supposed to say all that? Anyway, he addressed, came as part of an invitation every year. Since 1976, we've always invited the candidates to come before us, starting with Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford. And of course, the Republican candidate took us up on it, came, and tried to make a fool out of Rachel Scott. Rachel Scott is an amazing reporter in Washington for ABC News, and she held her own for sure. But he did not answer any questions. You just saw a sample of it, and I just remember so many of my Link sisters. I was sitting in the front row, audibly laughing, which probably wasn't a good look for me, but I couldn't believe he was acting the way he was acting, and my phone started to just light up, and a lot of people were watching it live, but had no idea what NABJ was. We were approaching our 50th year, and so Dorothy Tucker, who was our former president, and a few others, we all got together and said we really ought to do a documentary. James Blue, who is a mentee of mine, former senior vice president of the Smithsonian Channel, decided to go back to documentary producing, is up for actually a Peabody now on another doc that he did. Got us. He knew the organization well, and I have to say, I was one to try to keep everybody honest, but he had an extraordinary vision on how to tell a very complex story with mostly file footage. As you saw, most of that footage we had to acquire and find, including a 1978 stand-up that I did at KDKA. I don't remember the dress, I don't remember the hairdo, I don't remember any of that stuff. I don't remember the story, but somebody found it, we found it, but there was a lot of really archival research that was done to get all the images in the film.
Rachel is an NABJ baby, right?
Rachel, as you saw her, a little stand-up that she did, as was Shaq Brewster, many of you know him from NBC, Yamiche Alcindor, and of course you saw Roland Martin, who is, we call them NABJ babies because they started in our program.
And another connection you may not have noticed, Tony Cox is the father of one of the directors of the student training program now.
Yes, so we're seeing the next generation. Tony Cox, who talked about it, you know, that this was a newsmakers conference. His daughter, Lisa Cox. So we are seeing 2 and sometimes even 3 generations of Black journalists. I think one of the most important things that I want to note is that while this was our story, this was also the story of how, and I think you all got it, of how our founding has had an incredible impact on the next generations of Black journalists, which is what we really wanted to try to accomplish with this film.
Sandra, tell me how you learned about that first meeting of what became the NABJ and why you decided that you had to be there.
I was working in Wilmington, Delaware, and I would drive from Wilmington to Philadelphia to be a part of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. So preceding the national organizations, a number of cities had chapters of Black journalists, and Philadelphia had a chapter, and I'd heard about that. I had a couple friends, and I always sort of tell it was at that time, in 1974, 75, I-95 was not connected through, all the way through. So we had to go through the city of Chester to get to Philadelphia, which was always an interesting ride, but I digress. But in that chapter, because Chuck Stone was already very active and president of the Philadelphia chapter, he talked about getting together to have a national meeting. And I went back to my newsroom and I said, you know, I'd really like to go cover this meeting of Black political officials that would be meeting in DC, and they actually paid for it. So that was how I ended up going to Washington, DC for that very first meeting, and meeting in the Sheraton Park. And for me, I was the only Black woman in my newsroom. There were 2 other Black men. One was a sports reporter who I never saw because he worked at night, and the other was based in Washington, so I didn't see him. So the only other Black people I would get to interact with on most days might be the janitors who were coming in. I also had to work at night. There was a Black woman who ran the library, which at that time we called the morgue, because there were dead stories that were clipped out of the newspaper, and then she would file all of them. So I got to talk to her sometimes. But I can tell you it was lonely at times, and there were times that we still had to really fight and push to get stories into the paper. So.
Jay, do you recall your first NABJ meeting?
I do, and it was at CBS, and Gary Anthony Ramsey, who I worked with at New York One, would always be sure to round up all of us to make sure that we were aware of what was going on at NYBAJ.
New York Association of Black Journalists.
Yes, and just to pick up on your point about, you know, being in a newsroom and not seeing anyone who looked like you, you know, times have changed, but they are also the same. You know, I'm in a newsroom. I'm fortunate enough to be in a newsroom where just in my little section, there are 3 bald black men that sit all in the same little area. We are often confused with one another, myself, Corey Chambers, and Candace Gibson, Craig Treadway, and we are an anomaly in New York, as opposed to the rest of the country. But I do remember my first job in Altoona, Pennsylvania, when I was 23 years old, and Randall took me under his wing along with Uncle Harold, and when I went out there and talking to them about that experience, I was like a speck of pepper on a mountain of salt. And, I didn't know what to expect. They didn't know what to expect. But how times have changed, where we are now in numbers here in the city. But what we are seeing is a culture where things are out in the open now. And one thing that I can remember my mother always saying, who's from Arkansas, she's in the audience this evening, is that she could always appreciate growing up in Arkansas because they would always call her the N-word to her face. Whereas up here, it's not to your face, your mortgage application is denied as you walk out the door. Or that promotion or that job that you wanted is given to someone else. And now we are seeing, and Randall and I were just talking about this in the few minutes before we came in here, how at one particular network where we both spent a good deal of time, you much longer than I, people who look like us are being shown the door. And there are other people who do not look like us who are being found places in the company to stay on. Positions and opportunities blatantly being given to people who don't look like us. And I think now more than ever, it's important that we all stick together, because whereas you, the founders, you really, out of a sense of necessity, said, you know what, we need to stick together and stand up, because there's no one like us in our respective newsrooms. We have to collectively come together. So here today in 2025, we are in numbers in the newsroom, but we're still under assault in so many ways. And how we rise to that challenge, I don't think that answer has been formulated yet. We're still trying to figure that out, because I know a lot of us are still trying to wrap our heads around the fact that this is all happening today, after years of so much quote-unquote progress.
Before we move forward to the next round of questions, I just want to share with all of you, as I'm sitting there watching this wonderful documentary, I see connections to my history. So your mom is from Arkansas. I'm from Mississippi. One of the founders of the NABJ was a gentleman named William Dilday. William Dilday was the very first Black general manager of a commercial television station in the United States of America. He was hired at WLBT Channel 3 in Jackson, Mississippi, because of a license challenge that became a landmark case called United Church of Christ v. FCC. The original owners of WLBT, Lamar Light Broadcasting, in an effort to try to keep the license, opened up what at the time was called an on-the-job training program. My father's minister sent me to Channel 3 to apply for one of those on-the-job training programs. Dilday at the time wasn't there. He was the general manager was Robert McRaney. I was hired at the radio station as a DJ. Was given an assignment at some point to read the news on Saturday night. So my very first job in television news was writing, producing, and anchoring the 15-minute Saturday night newscast, which was the trainee slot at that time. That then became the 10 o'clock news and the 6 o'clock news. Mr. Dilday was hired, and he promoted me to the 6 o'clock news with reluctance. Told me that my raise was going to be the chance to do the job, at which point I got ticked off and applied for another job. But anyway, but he was one of the founders of NABJ. In 1975, I was in Washington, D.C. By that point, I'm working for a Post Newsweek station in Jacksonville, Florida, which also owned WTOP in Washington. And I went there to meet Max Robinson, one of the NABJ founders. I went to the station, they said, he's not here, he's at this hotel. So I go to the hotel. Mr. Dilday is at the hotel. Max Robinson is at the hotel, and Max says to me, I'll be at the station a little while later, meet me there. Deal Day didn't tell me that they were organizing this thing. I could have been a founder too. Sandra, as you look at, and by the way, I'm assuming that you were a good friend of Michael Day's.
Very
Yes,
good friend
yeah.
of Michael Days.
Michael Day's was a Pulitzer
Yes.
Prize winner. He was also a manager at the Inquirer and the
Yes,
Daily News.
And the Daily News. Michael became executive editor of the Daily News.
Recently passed.
Yeah, he passed away last month. So, Michael, well, first of all, Michael was an extraordinary human being, just a very kind man, a very wise man. And Michael too felt he could have been a founder, and someone said, you know, that meeting is right down the hall.
Who told you?
That's it. But his career, and both that year, there were 2 Black editors who led their newsrooms in 2010 to win Pulitzer Prizes in investigative journalism. And we, Black journalists in Philadelphia, got together to celebrate Michael and the win that he was able to do. And I recently found that picture. I posted it on Facebook. And there were about 20, 25 of us who just congratulated him for his hard work. And I found it and sent it to Michael earlier this year, because I hadn't seen it for a while. And he recalled that evening as well. And during, I spent some time following the funeral services, and we talked about it. It was just a great evening where we all could gather as Black journalists to celebrate and lift up a Black journalist who had achieved that highest honor, that Pulitzer Prize, that we would all like to see.
I have a question for you and for Allison. Both of you were senior managers, and maybe not known by a lot of people. Your title was Executive Vice President of MSNBC, or was it America's Talking?
Which job?
The first, which job? The one where you ran what we later learned, well, it's no longer MSNBC, but I mean, it was. Didn't you start
Yes,
that?
yeah, I did the business plan for MSNBC.
She did the bit, say that again slowly.
I did the business plan for MSNBC.
Among many other jobs that she had. And you, Sandra, were also managers. Here's my question. In your roles as journalists of color, how would you describe your impact on, shall we say, providing diversity, hiring, promotion, and story selection?
Well, a few things. Thankfully, I was in a position where there was some trust. I will also, however, say, and I think that most of my Link sisters know this, I was not manageable. I was not manageable, and so thankfully I had presidents of NBC that understood that. I will tell you about story selection, and I'm going to be, I guess it'll get out anyhow, but I'll say it anyhow. I was very concerned about a few things. If you remember when O.J. Simpson was on trial, the Time magazine showed this terrible picture of him, this darkened picture, and so I remember being in the Today Show control room when the graphics person, that picture came up again. And I said, no way are you going to put that on. And I think I may have told the then executive producer, who was Jeff Zucker, who later became the president of CNN. I think I probably lifted him up and threw him out, and then got on the headsets and said, take that picture down. That's not accurate. Those are the kinds of things that we would have to do on a daily basis. But one of the things that I convinced the president at the time, a guy named Michael Gardner, to do was to really take a look at our newscast. I mean, to really, really take a look at the newscast and to see how biased some of the stories were. If you've noticed, you know, when there was a story about, it was a generic story about, you know, crime statistics. You know, what did you always see but a black man with you know, handcuffed, you know, behind his back, you know, as a way to describe what? You know, crime statistics which were predominantly white, you know, and so, you know, we pulled together all of these instances where on nightly news you would see these, you know, incredible images that, you know, made my sons, you know, embarrassed. You know, and I tell this story in conjunction with my oldest son, who, if many of you remember, Chutes and Ladders. So I had the Chutes and Ladders game, and I told him, he was about 5 or 6, and I put the Chutes and Ladders down, and he, you know, was starting to, I said, you got to pick whatever little item you want to use to go around the Chutes and Ladders. So there were like little figurines, and one was a black kid, one was a white blonde kid, one was, and they, you know, they're little things that you would. So he picked the white one. He picked the white one with the blonde hair, and I said, Tyler, why would you pick that? And he said, I said, why don't you pick the one that looks like you? And he said, well, Mom, I can't win with him. And that's when I realized that it was time to make a statement at NBC News, and what the biggest statement was, and I'll name her, Katie Couric and Jeff Zucker had gone to Saudi Arabia or one of those, Kuwait or whatever, and they were doing a story on why we were there. And they interviewed all the white soldiers, but if you remember, I think 27% of the armed forces were black and brown. And they interviewed all of these white men and white women about why we were wherever we were in Kuwait or Saudi Arabia, and then they had a 10-second image, or we call it B-roll, of blacks playing basketball. And so I said, this is unacceptable, in this little meeting with the president and Katie Couric, who did the story, and a couple of other people. And Katie said, well, you know, if we were to interview those folks who were playing basketball, she didn't say black folks, but they were all black, she said, you know, I would have to walk, you know, all the way across the base or whatever. And I said, no, Katie, you have to do your job. Well, I got it a little, you know, I was unmanageable. But I say all that to say that was the kind of sort of, you know, that was our life. You know, we were constantly having to remind folks of their responsibilities, the need to be accurate, and talking to young journalists now, it hasn't changed much, and that's always upset me.
And the need to be fair. And listen to that story and what we have been witnessing this year of the erasure, the blatant erasure of contributions of women, of people of color, from Department of Defense documents, websites, the cemetery, Arlington.
Right.
And so everything old is new again. Unfortunately. I'm sorry, Senator. Yes.
Well, what I wanted to do, what you heard Allison talk about was how it's managed in television. My career has been in newspapers, and in newspapers, and when I became an editor, one of the things that I would always push back on and say to the reporters, let's interview different people. You know, let's not quote the same people. did you interview somebody black for this story? I mean, I asked directly, and they said, well, no, I couldn't find someone. Yes, you can. Go back out there, find someone. And the more I did that with one reporter, two reporters, it kept adding up. And finally they knew, don't bring me a story where you have not interviewed a variety of people, bringing different voices to the table. And because I was an editor, I also participated. We have daily news meetings. We have 2 meetings a day. And in the morning, you're sort of talking about what you're hoping to cover that day. In the evening, it's, okay, let's make the decision about the 5 to 7 stories that may go on the front page. And asking the questions, all right, so what does that front page look like? What are we telling people? Is it the same people again that we're quoting? What kinds of stories? So pushing for the variety of stories. And the one other thing that I did was try to reach out to people of color, especially in the newsroom, and just have a lunch and go out and talk about what they hope to do, what kinds of stories they wanted to do. And then I could advocate for those stories to happen, to make sure that they did take place. So but it was a constant, it wasn't just a one time, it was every day that you're thinking about these things. It's not one time.
Jay, when I see your reports, it seems to me that you have been able to convince your managers to allow you to do the kinds of stories that you want to do. Now, correct me if I'm wrong about that, but if in fact that is true, what I want to know is how in the world have you managed to do that?
Sometimes I don't know. I have a feeling Thank you. Sometimes I don't know. What I will say, let me start off by saying that 2 stations here in the city recently got rid of their race and culture units and their diversity divisions, completely gone. And I know people who worked in both of them, both places, NBC and CBS. And so, to answer your question, Randall, I mean, let's be honest, I've been working for some time now. I don't know that I would be able to make those decisions, file those stories, make those pitches, and push them through if I just started last year. But this is my 26th year in New York. So, sticking around and surviving sometimes means something.
How have you developed a relationship with managers through the years, especially in the early years when they were getting to know you, getting to know your work ethic, getting to trust you?
I don't know.
Did you take them out drinking?
I don't know how I'm going to say this, but anybody seen the movie Django? Yes. I'm not Steven. And so, and that's Samuel L. Jackson's character. I have been very vocal over the years at every point in my career because I walk with the history that my parents instilled in me. And so my parents sat me down every year to watch Eyes on the Prize. I spent every summer in either Arkansas or in South Carolina. So, my history is very important to me. And I have, my radar for discrimination or being discriminated against is very, I'm very in tune with that. And what you described is happening years ago where, you would have to speak up if you saw, imagery, which was dog whistle, but still, racist. That's still happening today. And so, I make it a point to speak up in the meetings and say, well, why are we, if the only reason we keep going to Newark is because of a crime, or the only reason that we go to East New York or to South Jamaica or to South Bronx is because of some kind of crime, and inevitably you're going to have the police department put out DCPI sheets where black or brown suspects are central to the story. And so I've been grateful to have the opportunity to have a show where I get to call the shots on every decision that's made on the show. And so when I go to Harlem, it's not to talk about the shooting on 126th Street. I spent the day in the senior center talking to seniors about their rising healthcare costs, or talking to young parents who are struggling to make it, to have them articulate what this affordability crisis looks like to them and what it feels like to them, to profile an organization that is building up young kids who don't have anything to do after school. So, and our newsroom is filled with voices like that. So I think you have to do it in numbers. You have to all speak up at the same time and in the same way.
So, we can have this conversation, the four of us, for the rest of the evening, but I know that many of you have questions that you want to ask. And there's my dear friend, I have to take a moderator's privilege here, Douglas Lawrence, worked with me in Hartford, Connecticut, shortly after he graduated. Yeah, he's a Yalie, but don't blame him for that. And when I came to New York, I was fortunate enough to be able to persuade Doug to let me crash in his apartment, which he did. I put him out, but he let me stay there. Dear friend, lifelong, the brother from another mother, Doug Lawrence.
And this is inspiring, very much so. So I have one question. Where did you find the courage? Where did you find the courage to get up every single time you got knocked down and keep moving forward?
Jay just talked about his family, and I had a very activist family. My father worked for the AFL-CIO. He was the assistant director of the Civil Rights Department, and spent a lot of time in Selma with King. Many of you might know that it was organized labor that paid for a part of the civil rights movement. And so my dad would, and we were living in Teaneck. And my father, when he came home, because he was working in Washington, and my mother refused to go to segregated schools in Maryland or in Washington. And so we stayed in Teaneck, and my dad would come home and tell us what he had done all week, and where he had been and who he had met. And at that time, I was sort of embroiled in a situation here in Teaneck. I was a member of the first class, 6th grade school during the voluntary integration of schools here in Teaneck. So with a mom who was lovely but was scared to death about what was happening in the community, and with a dad who would come home and give us the strength to move forward. My father then was appointed by Johnson to start the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, so we then moved to the Washington area, where we integrated the schools there as well. My high school, where I had to be a fighter. There were 7 African Americans in my high school of 640. So I say all that to say that I can praise my parents and also blame my parents for putting us into situations that we were the first, the only, but we knew, because again of the kind of fighter my dad was in particular. We came from good stock, and we knew what we had to do in order to succeed, and also in order to make the substantive changes that my parents expected us to make.
Am I right in saying that Teaneck was the first district in the state to desegregate following Brown versus Board of Education?
And just to add a little bit to that, your question, where did you get the courage? So I want to go back to December 12th, 1975. There were 44 of us who signed that attendance sheet, but there were many more of us who were actually in the room. And people hesitated because they said, if I sign, I have a family, I may lose my job, then I can't support my family, or I don't want my employer to know. And I was 23, and I just said, I'm signing, I'm here. I'm surrounded now by Black journalists. These are people who do what I do, and I want to be able to associate with them. And I did it, and once that to me was the beginning of a commitment to journalism, which I still love to this day, and I wanted to be successful in it, and I was determined. So it was that sort of inner determination, inner strength that I pulled from to keep going every day. And I'm not giving up.
My story is a little different because I was recruited into a movement in Jackson, Mississippi that really launched the equalization of, not equalization, but the ability of people of color to become engaged in broadcast journalism around the country. When general managers saw the FCC lose its license because of discriminatory broadcasting at Channel 3, when they saw that around the country, they began to get on the good foot. This was around 1965, 66, 67, somewhere in there. There were, I guess you could count on one hand, the number of people of color who were on TV anywhere in America. Was that before Mel Good? 60, yeah, before Mel Good. Mel Good, who, God rest his soul, was a longtime resident of Teaneck, and he was the first African-American correspondent hired by ABC News. And he was before anybody at NBC or CBS. So I didn't really have to fight for my first job. My challenges, and let me just add something else. So the station where I started was the same station where Medgar Evers made his speech in 1963. Medgar had written letters to the FCC and to the two stations at the time in Mississippi asking for equal time to explain the perspective of Black people, of civil rights leaders, per the requirement of the stations to provide access to everybody in the market area. But the station said, well, we don't have to let you talk. We'll let the White Citizens Council talk. We'll give them a bookstore in the TV station. We'll give them a 30-minute public affairs show on the weekends, but nothing from the colored people of Jackson, and they didn't use the word color, of course. But Medgar kept trying. And so finally, when they saw that there was this growing movement of challenging the license, which at the time they had to renew it every 3 years, they said, okay, Medgar, we'll let you speak. So he makes this speech, 17 minutes, at WLBT Channel 3. And in doing so, he became a target for an assassin named Byron DeLay Beckwith. 1 month later, he was killed. And his wife, Merle Evers, says that she believed that it was that speech that targeted him for assassination on Channel 3. That's 1963. Flash forward 8 years later, and I'm like the second or third Black person on TV at that station. By 1973, I'm anchoring the main newscast. The following year, when I left, I had gone through 1 or 2 ratings periods. I found out that my newscast had gotten higher ratings than anybody's newscast in the history of that station. Now, what's significant about that is, in the 70s, ARB and Nielsen, the two rating services, distributed notebooks. You had to write down what you watched. This is before cable boxes, young folks, before a bunch of stuff. Those notebooks were not distributed to black people. So it was the white folks in Mississippi who looked at this young man who delivered their news, who decided that what we were doing at that station with the team, black and white team, run by Deal Day, they liked what we were doing and gave us the highest ratings. The other thing I learned in a book written by Kay Mills called Changing Channels, and Kay did some extensive research in the National Archives. She said, well, she did two things. She looked at the letters and listened to the recordings when Medgar made his speech that were hate-filled, that were just filled with venom and vile and racist comments. Then she looked at the letters and the phone calls when I left that station. They got more calls about me leaving than they did about making a speech in Mississippi.
And then you always been a man, we know that.
Well, but here's the thing. I get to New York some years later to Channel 2, and I'm thinking I'm going to be like an anchor or whatever. And they told me, no, we can't put a person of color. I can't tell you who said this because I promised him I wouldn't use his name. But I could never land an anchor job at Channel 2. I mean, a permanent anchor job. I was the morning news cut-ins. Carol Martin was doing the weekends. But it would be like the 90s before Channel 2 hired a black male anchor, John Johnson.
Channel 2 has always had that problem.
And well, of course, not today. But I'm just saying that when you say, how do you have the courage? I started at a place where I was encouraged. I didn't really run into hard knocks until I got to New York and then to CBS Network. And that's going to be something I'll put in my memoirs if I ever write memoirs. Question from someone else? Anybody?
Can we also, you gave a shout out to this young man. I just want to give a couple of shout outs because way in the back is Chi-Chi Williams. Maybe you all
Chi-Chi.
remember Chi-Chi. She was certainly a pioneer in early morning television here. And Maria Trice was also on Channel 9 here for years. So I just wanted to give both of them a shout out.
Chi-Chi, were you the second African American female to be hired by Channel 7 after Melba?
Yes.
Thought so, okay. Melba Tolliver.
I just want to say that Allison is the one who got you my job on the station.
Thank you, Alice.
I just wanted to say thank you for the film and thank you for the founders. I'm a resident of Teaneck. I'm an NABJ member,
What's your name?
and I'm a columnist and reporter at the Daily News. My name is Leonard Green. And just three quick things. 40 years ago, when I was a student at NYU, New York University, Randall's not going to remember this, but he was a guest speaker at one of my classes. I don't remember what he said, but I remember being inspired by it. And I want to say thank you for that. I want to say thank you to the founders, the women who were on the panel. It's important to me because just in my travels, I've had some editors I've worked with. In all this time, I've had one woman editor in all the years that I've worked in journalism. And the way I tell the story is that I've had as many women editors as we've had black presidents of the United States. The third thing I wanted to talk about, it was nice to see Les Payne in your film.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I'm a New Yorker, but I didn't get to work in New York until Les Payne hired me I was a reporter at Newsday. Les Payne hired me, and it was significant to me because as the first black editor, first black man who ever hired me to do anything. So I call myself a branch on the Les Payne tree. And I'm a branch on your trees also. Thank you.
And Les Payne was also one of the first black reporters to win a Pulitzer Prize.
Right.
Yes.
For his work, so standing out.
Allison, Sandra, everyone. Allison, your movie really touched. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. Thank you. I had the privilege of going to the National Association of Black Journalists in 1991 in Kansas City. Max Robinson, everybody was there. Vernon Jarrett was there, and we became friends. So my question is, in doing this documentary, Vernon Jarrett, Chuck Stone, what did you discover about them that you didn't know already in terms of courage, in terms of all the different attributes that you have now? But how did they contribute to who you are in this moment?
Well, I was Vernon's vice president, so when he was president of NABJ, so I knew him very, very well, and I knew Chuck because Chuck worked for Adam Clayton Powell, and Chuck also knew my dad. But I will also say I'm a hoarder, and so I have kept 400 pages from 1975, and I've just carried them. And finally, about maybe 6 years ago, I decided to take a look at them and read them. And Chuck was a mad memo writer. Oh my gosh, he would write a memo, and of course, it's no email, it's snail mail. And so I kept all of that stuff, and things that I forgot, and believe me, I forgot a lot, I was reminded. I've since digitized all of that, and I've noticed that there is value from libraries who would like them, and I'm just trying to figure out, where I'm going to send them. But the bottom line is that I had, because I was on the executive board and I was the youngest, I had probably more interaction with Chuck and with Vernon than most folks did. Again, I was the parliamentarian for Chuck and wrote the first Constitution, and I was the vice president under Vernon Jarrett.
I'm very pleased, and thank you to the gentleman from the Daily News who remembers me from 40 years ago when there was less of me to see. Les Payne is from Hartford, Connecticut. Doug Lawrence is from Hartford, Connecticut. My friend, he just stepped away for a minute. I worked in Hartford, and what do you call it? The congruence of connectedness is amazing. When I went to your uncle's office, Harold Dow, to meet him for the first time, I was working at Channel 2 in local news, and Harold was a network correspondent. Harold, you may or may not recall, was the first person to interview Patty Hearst. If you look up, I think it's still on the web somewhere. There's this brother with this big fro, and they're sitting on a white couch. I mean, bas relief or whatever. But and there she is, and Harold told me the story. I said, "How did you get that interview?" He said, "Well, Harold liked to hang out after the trials every day, and CBS sent him to sit in the court and take notes, but they would not allow him to do the story. I think it was Terry Drinkwater, one of the senior correspondents in LA, that he would hand over his information.
He would sit behind F.B. Bailey every day.
And he would sit behind F.B. Bailey, who was Patty Hearst's defense attorney. And so, but Harold knew where F. Lee Bailey went for drinks. And so one day, F. Lee Bailey says to Harold, why is it that you've never asked me for the interview? And Harold told me that he told F. Lee, well, if CBS won't let me do it, because it'll go to Terry or go to Walter Cronkite. And F. Lee Bailey said to him, I decide who will interview Patty. You want the interview? So that's how Harold Duff got the interview with Patty Hearst. Oh, somebody has a question over there. And while you're getting the mic to them, I just wanted to give a salute to Les Payne, who was a giant and just a wonderful guy, like your uncle, who just took people under his wing. And he was tough, but he was fair, and he gave a lot of people opportunities. Yes, and would you give us your name, please, and your question?
Clara Williams.
Yay, Clara. Congratulations.
She's elected, yes, elected school board. Yeah.
School board.
So given the changing landscape of journalism, what advice would you give young people who are interested in going into the field?
That question is to who?
Whoever wants to take it.
I defer to the founders.
Well, I meet students all the time, and I have been just blessed with great mentees. It's hard to tell them that the future is bright for Black journalists. However, I often tell them the importance of doing the kinds of, I think Dwayne talked about it in the movie, being curious is important. Doing your research is important. And I don't mean Wikipedia. I mean doing your research is extremely important. I have, in 2022, there was a young lady who was from Ohio State, and she was in our program, our student projects program, when we were virtual. And so she wanted to be a print reporter. And we said, print is great, but you have to do it all now. You see more print reporters on television now than you probably read their articles in newspapers. And so we said, is there anybody, she was living at home at the time, and I said, is there anybody that can kind of, dress you up a little bit? So she said, and for Mike Link's friends, that's kind of hard for me to say about dressing up, but she was, come to find out, she had gone to the same high school that I did. She wrote for the student newspaper like I did, and her parents were from Jamaica, like my mother's side, so West Indian. So everybody was calling her my mini-me, and come to find out, she graduates, we keep in touch, she calls, she shows me some of the work that she's doing, I comment. She gets an internship at Bloomberg, and she's doing, really, really well. She graduates, and then, but she did a documentary on women's crew and won an Emmy in Ohio. And so we keep talking, and she's, she then gets another kind of job. They have, it wasn't an internship, but it was, try it before you buy it, which is a lot of these stations are doing now, let you come to this special program and be with us for 13 months, 12 months, and then we'll figure if we want you. Well, they did want her. She then calls me up and she says, they want me to do cryptocurrency. I want to do politics. And I said, well, you have to stay a year. It surprises me. I mean, I stayed at NBC for 1 trillion years, but a lot of these young folks, they're skipping around, before even the year is up. So I said, you gotta stay a year. And she said, okay. So 2 weeks later, she calls me up and she says, thanks for making me stay. And I said, well, what happened? She said, Bloomberg offered me the White House. What makes this story even better is that she did very well. If you were watching, MSNBC or CNN. She was always on the air early in the morning because that happened to be her shift. Right before our conference in Cleveland, just in August, about a week before, she calls again and she says, "Okay, you're going to be mad at me." And I says, "What are you doing now?" And she said, "I'm leaving Bloomberg." And I said, "Oh no." And I'm trying to figure out how I can talk her out of it. She says, "No, MSNBC has offered me the White House." So many of you, her name is Akela Gardner, and she is oftentimes on MSNBC. But I say all that to say that, as a mentor, the one thing that I think I did well by her is to be available, is to always be at the other end of that line, to be able to listen and to hopefully guide. And even to this, even now, if she's on the air, I'll get a message sometimes and she'll say, "How did I do?" And I'd say, "Keep your eyes open. Your eyes were closed when you were on air." But she is really, really going to be somebody. And I'm sorry, and she just turned 25. So yes.
And to add to that story, so Akela Gardner, I do a program for Dow Jones, working with young journalists and helping them, adding skills to what they already have. And young journalists, 1 to 3 years in the business. And so I actually hired her. She wasn't a fellow in the program. She actually taught some of the fellows in the program on how to do some of the research and some of the reporting. And she was excellent. So it's not just, she mentored her, but then because we knew each other, I was looking for a certain type of person to do some teaching. She was able to also recommend her to me. So it's those connections that we make in this
Can
business.
I just tell a story, just a very short story? So we are in Cleveland, and what's his name? Stephen A. Smith?
Stephen A. Smith.
Stephen A. Smith is doing the show
Oh, you.
out of there, and all of a sudden, Stephen A., if you've ever watched him, he just shouts and he gets crazy, and he turns into this little lamb because he sees her, his mentor. And he's like, oh my, he was so excited to see. So yeah, even the Stephen A. Smiths realized that they didn't get where they got by themselves.
To answer your question, speaking from the perspective of someone who's in it every day, this is still a noble profession. It is still a place where it is important for people who look like me to be in the conversation and telling the stories. That said, I love analogies, and I think that our business right now, 30, 40 years ago, in the heyday when Randall was working, it was the Queen Mary, and you wanted a place on that ship. And now, our business is more like a Mississippi riverboat, and it's got holes in it, and it's slowly sinking. I see the ratings every day. When I didn't have a show and I was just a reporter, I wouldn't have access to the information I do now. So I'm in the sales meetings, I'm in the meetings with the research people, and I see how the number of viewers is dropping every single year because of our phones, and our business is supported by the 30-second ads, the commercials. So, General Motors, Toyota, all the big Fortune 500 companies that will pay $30,000, $40,000 for a 30-second commercial. That is how all of the employees of a local television station or network, that's how they make their money. That's how we make our money. That's how our salaries are paid. The numbers now are a tenth of what they were 20 years ago. And so the trick is for all of the companies, the stations, to try to figure out how to charge that same amount of money, the exorbitant amount of money that they charge for a 30-second commercial, for that little 15-second ad that plays before the video you're going to watch on your phone, which, by the way, you get to skip after 5 seconds.
We have a few more questions we can take because I know we can't stay here all night. There's a hand raised in the rear, but as the mic gets to that person, Let me give the mic to Ms. Hall.
I'm Gloria Hall. I've worked a quarter of my life at CBS. I'm not a journalist, but what I know about CBS is on the finance side. That's the part that I lived, and I still live finance. But you just mentioned Bloomberg and cryptocurrency and how the journalism side and the finance side creates the revenue so that you can do your job. Can you explain that further? Because I know zero about crypto.
Make it quick though, please, and then we'll take the question in the rear.
Oh, you want me to answer that?
Yeah, because I don't.
About crypto? Well, I don't know the correlation between crypto and the networks and how they charge for commercials. What I do know is that the revenue that a television station makes is from selling ad time. So when the newscast says we'll be right back, the breaks are usually 2 minutes, 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and 30-second commercials, and they charge a bunch of money to the company that wants to advertise their goods, their services, their products during that time. And that's why the political ads are, when the elections come around, the news stations, it's like going to a buffet and they're ecstatic because of how much money they're gonna make, because all of the campaigns that wanna spend money. So, that's how the stations make their money.
Question in the rear.
Yes. Hi,
Name, please.
Shanaz. My question is, we're seeing journalists in the last couple of years in a very different place than they were maybe 10 years ago, where we've seen them literally in very risky situations. There's censorship that's happening. They're being attacked. We've also seen live murder of journalists on TV, and we've also seen the younger generation turn away from network news to more other forms of media to get their news. So how do you motivate people in the environment that we're in? And also we have a president who, if he doesn't like a reporter, well, we know what he does. So we see that sometimes on live too. So how do you motivate people in the current environment that just seems to be very difficult for people to tell the truth, to get into journalism?
Let me just, in part, answer another person's question, like, what's the advice to young people? First of all, read, and I mean read from a wide variety of sources. Second, write, because ultimately, whatever you present, you should write it first before you spew it out of the top of your head. People are now getting a lot of their information from so-called influencers, right? Those influencers, however, are getting their information from legacy news media because they're still relying on NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN for the content that they're going to talk about. With respect to the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, there have been other times in American history when the president did not really have much regard for other Americans, especially people of color. I'm thinking now about Woodrow Wilson, and I hope none of his relatives are here, but if you are, I'm just telling the truth about that. I mean, this is the guy and his wife who brought Birth of a Nation to the White House. It's this scurrilous movie that portrayed the post-Civil War period of America as being dastardly in terms of black political participation, when in fact that's a lie. Well, now we see another occupant of 1600 claiming that cities are up in flames and that crime is rampant all over the place. And that too, yeah, that's crime, but it's not as bad as he says it is. So it's going to take courage. Journalism has never been an easy thing to do, and you have to be passionate about wanting to do it, and unfortunately have to be willing to make sacrifices if you really want to do that thing. And you won't always make a lot of money, and you won't always be praised, and you will frequently be criticized. One of my last assignments was required me to cover Trump's rallies in Mar-a-Lago, and they had the reporters behind this barricade. And I felt then that there was going to be a point where his supporters were just going to turn around. In fact, he talked about us like we were animals in cages. I mean, he didn't use those words, but it was like, look at them back there. And he still does, and now he does this publicly every day. A journalist can ask a question. I heard it today. Who are you from? I'm from NBC. Oh, that's, what is it called? Fake news. That's a totally inappropriate thing for any politician to do, to accuse a journalist of being fake just because they're asking a question you don't want to hear. But this, we just have to power through. Okay, that's my editorial comment. Allison.
And I'm just going to add to answer your question, Shanaz, I think people are a little confused about journalists, influencers, what they see on MSNBC, are not, like Al Sharpton, but he's not a journalist. I watch Morning Joe, but at least Joe is not a journalist. He's a former congressman. And so I think there's a lot of confusion in terms of who's a journalist and who isn't a journalist. And I will tell you that I think to a certain extent, and I've talked to my own alma mater, Boston University, that it's important that when they're teaching these would-be journalists, that they make sure they understand the distinction between the two, because I don't think that the audience really understands. We've had people in this township who have tried to do things and to say things, and then all of a sudden hide behind, well, I'm a journalist. No, you're not a journalist. You were a law clerk somewhere. So I share, and if you're from Teaneck, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I say all that to say that, we really do have to make you, the viewers, a little bit more educated as it relates to who is a journalist, and what's the difference. And I will also just share this one story. In 1992, I did an interview as a producer with Donald Trump. And he was, I wouldn't want to say nobody, but he was basically a nobody then. And I remember one of the things that he said during this interview is that when he dies, he wants to come back as a black man because they have it so easy. And when he ran the first time, I called up the NBC and I said, you need to find that tape. You really need to find that tape. And apparently it had been taken out of the archives when he was doing The Apprentice. But, dun, 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 I had the tape, but I didn't have a machine to run it. I didn't have a VHS machine. Who has a VHS machine? No, don't you worry. I found it. I did find a VHS. I borrowed somebody's VHS machine. But I do say, and the person who responded to that was Spike Lee, because he was also on the show, and he went, I can't believe he said that. So yes, this is not anything new.
Okay, if there's no one else who has a question they absolutely are just anxious to ask, I will ask one more point of privilege. I would like for the mother of J. Dow to please stand. Where are you, Mrs. Dow? Mrs. Dow, please stand up so we can see you. Where are you? There you go. The lady in red. Thank you so much. Thank you so very much for bringing us a young man. Yeah, I know you're not feeling young anymore, but trust me, you're young. Who's doing such a wonderful job on Pixie 11. And we're so proud of you. We're so proud of you. I want to thank all of you for sharing our film about the 50th anniversary of the NABJ, of the National Association of Black Journalists. And I want to thank my dear friend and neighbor whom I never see except in places like this, Allison Davis, for having the visionary determination to bring this to the screen.
One of our Hall of Famers, because you are.
Oh, thank you so much.
And also for Sandra for coming up from, oh no, you came just from the next town over, never mind. And Jay, thank you so much as well.
And also to the Bergen County chapter of the Links, not only for sponsoring this film, but for sponsoring other films through the years. I've had the opportunity and the privilege and pleasure of moderating several of the films that have been sponsored by the Links. And Jeremy, is Jeremy still here? Oh, thank you so much for your leadership of the Teaneck International Film Festival and making sure that the focus remains on social stories with social impact. Now more than ever, these kinds of films need to be shown. And with that,
Can I say one last thing?
Oh, please,
One
yes,
last thing.
yes.
I'd just like to say it's so great to see so many of you here watching the film, and I hope that you have learned something about NABJ and the impact that our organization has had, not just in this country, but really in the world, and the voices that we have been able to bring to the table, bring to, and again, I go back to sort of our motto for this 50th anniversary, resilience, advocacy, and excellence. And those are the things that we've always strived to do, and I believe that we have been able to do over the 50 years. And now we kick off the next 50 years and the next generation of Black journalists to do the work, to do the research, to tell the stories that should be told, and to make sure that our history is not erased, but is continuing to be told.